Hi students. Let me start with coordination compounds. This is our next chapter. Coordination compounds are also called as complex compounds. In the first subtopic of this particular chapter, let me explain what is meant by an addition compound. What is meant by addition compound? Addition compound, how many types of addition compounds we have? What are the differences between them and examples. Now, this is our first topic. Addition compounds are of two types. One type is called as double salts and another type is called as coordination compounds or complex compounds. So, first type is double salt and second type is coordination compounds. Addition compounds are those compounds which are obtained by just adding the constituent salts. With examples I will explain. Let me repeat the definition of these addition compounds. Addition compounds are obtained by just adding the required compounds, just by adding. Nothing else is required. Simply by addition they are obtained. Okay. And there are two types, double salts and coordination compounds. First let me come to the double salts, the case of double salts. Okay. Now for example, if you take 1 mole KCl solid, KCl is an ionic compound and it is in solid state at normal conditions. So let me take 1 mole of KCl. Now let me take 1 mole of MgCl2 also, and it is also solid. KCl is a simple salt, MgCl2 is a simple salt, and let me dissolve these two salts in water. And you all know, whenever you dissolve ionic compound in water, it dissociates into the constituent ions, cations, anions. So here you will get K plus aqueous and Mg plus 2 aqueous and Cl minus aqueous. So we have dissolved two simple salts in water and both are ionic and they are dissociated into constituent ions. Now this is the situation. Now suppose if you take this aqueous solution and if you do a test for K plus, you know in laboratory we do so many tests to identify the cation and anion. So there are tests for K plus, there are tests for Mg plus 2, there are so many tests for Cl minus. So this aqueous solution gives positive test for Cl minus, positive test for Mg plus 2 and positive test for K plus. Now on evaporation, because there is so much amount of water in that solution and you just evaporate it. On evaporation, you will get a solid. One particular solid is left behind. The entire amount of water is evaporated and a solid is left behind. And the composition of that solid is KCl dot MgCl2 dot 6H2O, which is called as carnallite, and this is in solid form. And here one important point is the structure of this solid, the composition, the structure of this solid is completely different from the structures of any of these two solids. So KCl is different, MgCl2 is different and carnallite is different. Carnallite is a full-fledged compound whose structure is different from that of KCl and MgCl. Okay. Now suppose if you take this carnallite and you dissolve it in water again, when you dissolve it in water again, you will get the same situation, the same original situation. K plus Mg plus 2 and Cl minus. You will get the same solution from which we got carnallite on evaporation. On evaporation by addition of water. So reversible. We are going back to the same situation exactly. So when you take carnallite and when you dissolve it in water, the resultant solution gives the test for K plus, it gives the test for Mg plus 2, it gives the test for Cl minus, it gives positive test for all the three cations. So exactly identical solution we will get back. Okay, and we have one more example like this, that is K2SO4 dot Al2SO4 thrice dot 24H2. It is called as potash alum. All of you must have studied about alums in your previous classes. And this potash alum is obtained by adding the constituent salts K2SO4 and Al2SO4 thrice, 1:1 molar ratio, and you add water. After adding water, you evaporate. So on evaporation, you will get potash alum, exactly similar to carnallite. So this is what is addition compound basically. Addition compounds are obtained by simply adding the constituent salts. So here the constituent salts are K2SO4 and Al2SO4 thrice, 1:1 molar ratio. Here KCl and MgCl2, 1:1 molar ratio. Now when you add these two before evaporation, the resultant aqueous solution gives test for K plus, for sulfate ion, for Al plus 3. Now on evaporation you obtain potash alum. Now you take potash alum and dissolve it in water. Now the resultant solution gives the test for all the three cations, K plus, Al plus 3 and sulfate ion. So this is the nature of the double salt. Double salt loses its identity in water. Okay. Now we have one more example for this, that is FeSO4 dot NH4 twice SO4 dot 6H2. This is Morse salt. So Morse salt is also a double salt. It is basically addition compound and it belongs to the first type of addition compound, that is double salts. And here you add 1:1 molar ratio of ferrous sulfate, ammonium sulfate, and you add water also. On evaporation you will get that Morse salt. So you take 1 mole of FeSO4, 1 mole ammonium sulfate, NH4 twice SO4, and dissolve it in water and evaporate it, then you will get Morse salt. When you take FeSO4, NH4 twice SO4 and dissolve it in water, the resultant solution gives test for ferrous ion, for sulfate ion, for ammonium ion, and you take Morse salt, you dissolve it in water, and the resultant aqueous solution gives test for all the three cations, K plus, Fe plus 2, NH4 plus and SO4 minus 2. So these three are the examples of double salts. You add constituent salts, they in water, they dissociate into ions, and on evaporation you will get a solid, that is what is called as a double salt. And structurally double salt in solid form is different from the structures of the constituent salts. But in water, absolutely there is no difference. So double salts lose their identity in water. Now on the other hand, another type of addition compound, that is coordination compound or complex compound, and you see. Suppose here And you please remember one thing, this coordination compound is also a addition compound basically. Simply by adding the constituent salts, you will get the complex compound. But what is the difference between double salt and coordination compound? Let us see that. Now you take 4 moles of KCl and 1 mole of FeCN twice. This is solid, this is solid. 4 moles KCl and 1 mole FeCN twice. Now you dissolve these two in water. As soon as you dissolve it in water, K plus 4K plus 6Cn minus and 1 Fe plus 2. So both are ionic compounds, and like KCl, like MgCl2, they also dissociate in water. So they dissociated. Fe plus 2, 6Cn minus and 4K plus. But this situation lasts for few seconds only. That means it is only temporary situation. Almost immediately what happens here is, there is a reaction between Fe plus 2 and Cn minus. And a reaction happens between them, and you will get 4K plus plus FeCN taken 6 times minus 4. And this particular ion is called as complex ion. But such a thing did not happen here. You see this. The cation, anion, so many cations are there, so many anions are there, but there is no reaction between any cation and any anion in this case, in the case of double salt. But in this case, there is a particular reaction between Fe plus 2 and Cn minus, and resulting in the formation of a new ion. And that ion was not there originally. We have not taken that ion, but that ion is formed now. It is a new ion. And on evaporation, you will get a solid, that is K4 FeCN6. It is a solid. This K plus aqueous, this FeCN6 minus 4, so called complex ion, that is also aqueous. And on evaporation, you will get this compound. It is called as coordination compound. It is not called as double salt. Coordination or complex compound. Now, this is the difference between double salt and coordination compound. In the double salt, the ions are as they are. They are in the same form as we have taken them. But in the case of complex compound, a new ion is formed because of the interaction between some cations and anions. And that particular ion, which is newly formed, it does not lose its identity. Suppose you dissolve this solid in water, you will get back the same situation in water. Now, if you dissolve this complex compound in water, you won't get this situation. And that is the difference between double salt and coordination compound. Now, when you dissolve K4 FeCN6, you won't get Cn minus free. You won't get Fe plus 2 free. But they are combined and they are always present in the complex ion. They are always present in that form only. I have used this square bracket, and whatever I have written in the square bracket, that remains intact. That does not ionize. Basically what happened here is Fe plus 2 accepted lone pairs from Cn minus, Lewis acid. Cn minus is a Lewis base, lone pair donor, and between Fe plus 2 and Cn minus there is a coordinate bond. Yeah, that is the reason why they are called as coordination compounds. And you all know coordinate covalent bond is basically a covalent bond which does not ionize, which does not break in water. So obviously the bond between Fe and Cn, yeah, it did not break, it does not break like any other covalent bond. So it remains the same. So this is the difference between addition compounds and coordination compounds. let me tell you some basic characteristics of a coordination compounds. Suppose fundamental characteristics, you can say terminology. Of a coordination compound. Actually, let me discuss at this point two basic characteristics of a coordination compound, and later on I will give you some more characteristics. Let me tell you the fundamental characteristics of these coordination compounds now. Okay, the first point. Okay, suppose you take this compound K4FeCN6. Let me take this as an example, K4FeCN6. Now here we have just seen the oxidation state of iron here is +2, ferrous. Actually this compound is obtained by adding 4 moles of KCN and 1 mole of FeCN twice in water. You evaporate water and you will get K4FeCN6. And between Fe+2 and Cn minus some coordinate bonds are formed. This you know, all of you. So oxidation state of iron is +2. And that particular Fe+2 is called as central metal ion. Central metal ion in that complex ion, that is FeCN6 minus 4. So Fe+2 is called as central metal ion. Now Cn minus, you know Cn minus donated the lone pairs to Fe+2. Cn minus acted as a Lewis base and Fe+2 acted as a Lewis acid. So Lewis acid is called as central metal ion and Lewis base is called as ligand, Ligand. You know, ligand is simply a surrounding atom or group. The literal meaning of ligand is just surrounding atom or group. All of you recall chemical bonding. In chemical bonding you have seen so many examples. Suppose SF6, sulfur is the central metal atom, and F is the surrounding atom. PCl5, phosphorus is the central atom, fluorine is the surrounding atom. So these surrounding atoms are groups, they are also called as ligands. Generally we don't use the word ligand in chemical bonding, but ligand means exactly the same, surrounding atom or surrounding group. So central metal ion and ligand. Now this central metal ion and ligand together it is called as coordination pair. Some people also call it as coordination entity. The central metal ion and ligands together. That means whatever we write within the square brackets, we can also say whatever is not ionized in water, whatever retains its identity. In the solid state also it is like that, in aqueous state also it is like that. Yeah, that particular pair is called as coordination pair, which is also called as coordination entity. Now these K plus ions which are satisfying the charge of that complex ion, they are called as counter ions. And you all know when you dissolve this in water, counter ions get separated and complex ion gets separated. Complex ion, the entire complex ion behaves as a single entity in water. That is a very important point. And basically that is the difference between double salt and complex compound. Okay. Now here we know that the central metal ion is nothing but Lewis acid. It accepts lone pairs from the ligands, and ligands are nothing but Lewis bases. That already we have seen. So this is the first important point. Now, if you come to the second point, now let me give you 4 or 5 examples of coordination compounds. So the first one is K4FeCN6. The same example I am repeating, K4FeCN6. And the second example is CONH3 taken 6 times Cl3. And third example is FeCO5. That is also a coordination compound, FeCO5. And we have another example, that is Na2FeCO taken 4 times. So you see these 4 examples. Now if you come to the first complex, K4FeCN6, what is the charge on the coordination entity? -4. If you see the second example, what is the charge on the coordination entity? +3. And here it is 0. And here it is -2. Now see, actually here let me see 2 things. One is what is the charge on the coordination entity, and second one, what is the charge on the central metal ion. Now first let me write down charge on the central metal ion. Okay, here it is +2. 1 Fe +2, 4 Cn minus, 6 Cn minus. So the overall charge is -4. So charge on the coordination entity, coordination pair, it is -4. That means in this complex coordination complex ion is anion. Now if you come to the second example, here the charge on the cobalt central metal ion, you see ammonia, you all know ammonia is neutral, and you know it is Cl minus, 3 Cl minus. So the overall charge on the coordination pair is +3. And if charge on the coordination pair is +3, charge on the central metal ion must be +3 because ammonia is neutral. So here the complex ion is cation. So complex ion can be anion, complex ion can be cation, complex ion can be neutral. So that means it is not an ion itself, it is a neutral compound. Carbon monoxide, you all know carbon monoxide does not carry any charge, overall no net charge on carbon monoxide. So there are 5 carbon monoxide, 0 charge, overall is also 0, there is no counter ion, no K plus, no Cl minus, there is no counter ion, so that means the charge on the complex ion is also 0. So complex ion can be anion, complex ion can be cation, complex ion can be neutral, and in such case you don't call it as ion, simply the coordination entity. Okay, if you come here, then you see it carefully. Na2, counter ions are 2 Na plus. So obviously the charge on the coordination entity must be -2. And carbon monoxide is neutral. So the entire -2 must be present on iron. So here charge on central metal ion is -2. Rarest of the rare cases. We all know generally metals are electropositive, and generally in reactions these metals are converted into cations. It is general. Na to Na plus, Zn to Zn plus to Cu plus 2. It is what happens generally. But in few cases, the rare cases, the central metal ion can carry negative charge. And this is the example. And sometimes what happens, both cation and anion can be complex ions. Now suppose all of you look at this example. Cr NH3 taken 6 times, Cr Cl6. All of you look at that last example. Cr NH3 taken 6 times and Cr Cl6. Now here chromium, if you see, it is +3 and ammonia 0. Here chlorine -1 and here chromium +3. Generally you recall, all of you, the oxidation state of chromium is +3 and +6, and in that compound in both coordination entities chromium is in +3. So this particular complex ion has a overall charge of +3, chromium +3, ammonia neutral, and central metal ion +3. Here central metal ion same +3, but the coordination entity carries -3 charge. And you all see these 5 examples. Sometimes the complex ion is anion and counter ions are the cations. Sometimes complex ion is cation and the counter ions are anions. Sometimes the complex compound is neutral, and sometimes the complex compound is the cation as well as the anion. Both cation is the complex ion and anion is also the complex ion. So these are the various types of complex compounds, and this is the basic terminology we use. Ligand, nothing but surrounding atom or group. Central metal ion, which acts as a Lewis acid. Counter ions, which balance the charge of the complex ion. Now we can start the discussion about structure, bonding, shapes, hybridization in complex compounds. Actually, we study about 3 different theories regarding structure of complex compounds. And the most basic theory is Werner's theory. And after that we study about valence bond theory, and after that we study about crystal field theory, and there is molecular orbital theory also about complexes, but which is not there in our syllabus. So we study about 3 theories: Werner's, valence bond, crystal field. So now let me tell you about this Werner's theory. Now before I start giving you the postulates of this Werner's theory. Now let me tell you about 3 different topics. Most of you do not know about them. So first let me give you the introduction about those 3 topics, because to understand Werner's theory, you should have a superficial background of those 3 topics. And in that, the first topic is depression in freezing point. You have not come across this topic so far in any of your previous chapters. We will study about this in liquid solutions, but actually a preliminary knowledge of this topic is required to understand Werner's theory. So let me give you that superficial information about this topic. Okay. Now you all know what is meant by freezing point. Under normal conditions, that means at 1 atm pressure, freezing point of a liquid is the temperature at which that liquid comes into equilibrium with solid. Suppose you take water. At 1 atm pressure and 0 degrees Celsius, water comes into equilibrium with ice. So 0 degrees Celsius is called as the freezing point of water. If you talk in terms of ice, then it is melting point. If you see in terms of water, it is freezing point. Say liquid to solid, if you are seeing, then it is freezing point. But solid to liquid, if you are seeing, then it is melting point, but both are one and the same. It is the same temperature. Okay, so that is freezing point. Now, whenever you dissolve a salt in water, whenever you dissolve a salt or whenever you dissolve a solute simply, the freezing point of that particular liquid decreases, depression. Suppose if you see the freezing point of aqueous solution of NaCl, it is definitely less than 0 degrees Celsius. You add glucose in water and you measure its freezing point, you will find that it will be less than 0 degrees Celsius. You add urea in water, which is quite soluble, you measure the freezing point of the resultant solution, yes, it will be less than 0 degrees Celsius. So, whenever you add a solute, the freezing point of the resulting solution will be lesser than the freezing point of the pure solvent. So, because it is decreasing, so it is called as depression. That is one point. So, the first point is whenever you add a solute in any liquid, the freezing point of the solution will be less than the freezing point of the pure solvent. That is one thing. So, let me write that. The first point here is freezing point. Now, let me take it as TF. That is the freezing point. The temperature at which solid melts into liquid or the temperature at which liquid freezes into solid. Both come into equilibrium at 1 atm pressure. TF of a pure solvent is greater than TF of a solution. That means when you add solvent in that, when you add solute in that solvent. So, the resultant solution have a lesser freezing point than solvent. So, this is one thing. And second thing, the decrease in the freezing point, which is generally written as delta TF. The decrease in the freezing point is directly proportional to the molality of the particles present in the solution. Molality of the particles present in the solution. Molality, moles of the solute, that means moles of the particles. Here the particles is nothing but solute. So, moles of the solute present in 1 kg of the solvent. You all know that is what is molality. So, it is directly proportional. You make the molality 2 times, the depression will become 2 times. You make it 10 times, the depression will become 10 times, directly proportional. So, as a result, now if you see delta TF of NaCl, it is equal to 2 into NaCl aqueous, of course. It is 2 into delta TF of glucose. This is also aqueous. And I have taken both NaCl and glucose 1 molal solutions. Both 1 molal solutions. So, if you take 1 molal NaCl, molality 1. It is not molarity, it is molality. Moles of the solute present in 1 kg of the solvent. So, if you take 1 molal NaCl and 1 molal glucose, it is found that the depression in freezing point of this NaCl solution will be twice the depression in freezing point of the glucose solution. Obviously, because it is directly proportional to molality of the particles. If you dissolve glucose in water, it does not dissociate into ions. It is a covalent compound. But if you dissolve NaCl in water, it dissociates into Na plus and Cl minus. So, if you take 1 mole, you dissolve it in 1 kg of water, then you will get 2 moles of the particles. And in that 1 mole is Na plus and another 1 mole is Cl minus. So, it is 2 moles. But if you do the same thing with glucose, if you dissolve 1 mole of glucose, it remains as 1 mole of glucose because glucose does not dissociate. Okay. Then suppose if you take AlCl3, which is also an ionic compound in water. You all know, although AlCl3 is a covalent compound, but it behaves like ionic compound in water. It completely dissociates into ions. So if you see the depression in freezing point of AlCl3, then if you compare it with NaCl, so then delta Tf of AlCl3 aqueous is equal to 2 into delta Tf of NaCl aqueous. And both are 1 molar solutions. Okay, if you take 1 mole of NaCl, you dissolve it in water, how many particles, how many moles of particles you will get? 2. 1 Na plus, 1 Cl minus. Now, if you take 1 mole of AlCl3 and you dissolve it in water, so how many particles you will get? 4. 1 Al plus 3 and 3 Cl minus. So, number of particles present from glucose, 1 mole of glucose is 1 only. Number of particles coming from 1 mole of NaCl, 2 moles, so twice. And the number of moles of particles coming from 1 mole of AlCl3, 4. So, this is about depression in freezing point. Actually, when Werner proposed his theory, before giving the postulates of his theory, Werner did so many experiments. And one of the experiments is based on freezing point depression. He measured freezing point depressions of so many complex compounds. And the data helped him finding out the structure of the complex ion. So, in order to understand Werner's theory, we should basically be aware of these aspects of depression in freezing point. So, 2 points. One is when you add a solute, its freezing point is depressed, decreases, and the amount of decrease is directly proportional to the molality of the particles. It is the final particles, and you have to be very careful about ionic compounds, especially in this particular case. So, this is one thing. And if you come to the second point, you can say second concept about which you should have a fundamental information to understand Werner's theory, that is molar conductivity. You know, some aqueous solutions are non-electrolytes, some aqueous solutions are weak electrolytes, and some aqueous solutions are strong electrolytes. Electrolyte, it is a liquid, a solution, basically it is a liquid solution which conducts electricity due to the presence of freely moving ions, not electrons. So, please make a difference between metallic conductor and electrolyte. Electrolyte is a conductor because of the freely moving ions. Suppose if you take aqueous NaCl, yes, it is an electrolyte. You take aqueous AlCl3, it is an electrolyte. You take aqueous H2SO4, it is an electrolyte. But you take aqueous glucose solution, it is not electrolyte, because in glucose there are no ions. So, how can such a solution conduct electricity? Okay. Now, in this particular topic, you should know 1 or 2 basic points like this, similar to the depression in freezing point. Now, suppose if you see the molar conductivity of lithium chloride aqueous. Lithium chloride is an ionic compound, you dissolve it in water, it breaks into ions. So, aqueous solution of LiCl is an electrolyte, that means it can conduct electricity. Okay. Then it is found that its molar conductivity is approximately 112 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Actually, you will study about molar conductivity in detail in electrochemistry, don't worry about it. But to understand Werner's theory, you should know the basics of this molar conductivity. and basics of the freezing point depression. Okay, so this is the molar conductivity of LiCl. How much it is? 112 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Now, if you see the molar conductivity of CaCl2, calcium chloride, it is almost twice that of LiCl. In fact, a little more than twice. It is approximately 240 Siemens per centimeter square per mole. Now, if you come to LaCl3, lanthanum chloride, La plus 3, Ca plus 2, Li plus 1, unipositive, dipositive, tripositive. So, if you see LaCl3, then its molar conductivity is found to be around 390 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Okay, this is experimental data, but here the important point is molar conductivity of all the salts like LaCl, monovalent cation, monovalent anion, 1:1 salts, they are called as 1:1 electrolytes. So, molar conductivity of all such salts is approximately 112. Maybe 3 or 4 points plus or minus, but not much variation. It is 112, 115, 110, 119, 108. It is approximately around 112. All types of for all the examples of 1:1 electrolyte type. Let me write down here. LiCl is called as 1:1 electrolyte. Monovalent cation, monovalent anion. And all such electrolytes have molar conductivity approximately 112, not much different. And CaCl2 is called as 1:2 electrolyte. A divalent cation, one divalent cation. To satisfy the charges, there are two monovalent anions like Cl-. Now, similarly, LaCl3, if you see, it is 1:3 electrolyte. A trivalent cation and a monovalent anions. So, it is 1:3 electrolytes. So, all 1:1 electrolytes have around 112 Siemens centimeter square per mole, the molar conductivity. All 1:2 electrolytes have roughly around 240 Siemens centimeter square per mole, and all 1:3 electrolytes have roughly 390 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Suppose if you take NaNO3, if you take KCl, okay, now let me write. Actually, molar conductivity, symbol of molar conductivity is lambda. You know, it is uppercase lambda, Greek letter. Uppercase, capital lambda. You can say in normal language, you can say in a small letter, capital letter in English. So, similarly in Greek also we have lowercase letters and uppercase letters. This is uppercase lambda. And molar conductivity of LiCl is equal to approximately equal to molar conductivity of NaNO3, that is equal to molar conductivity of KBr, and that is approximately equal to 112 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Yeah, this is important point. So, all the 1:1 electrolytes have almost same molar conductivity. Similarly, if you come to 1:2 type, you can take CaCl2, you can take MgBr2, like that. You can take BaNO3 twice, barium nitrate, and all such salts have the molar conductivity approximately equal to 240 Siemens centimeter square per mole. Now similarly, molar conductivity of LaCl3 is equal to molar conductivity of similar salt AlCl3 1:3 type, and that is approximately equal to 390 Siemens centimeter square per mole. So two important points, all of you gather this information. One is depression in freezing point, and second one is molar conductivity. So in depression in freezing point, two important points are there. Solution freezing point is less than solvent freezing point, and the depression, the decrease in the freezing point is directly proportional to molality of the particles. Molality of the particles. And here we have molar conductivity. All these are electrolytes, and for a particular type of electrolyte, all examples have similar molar conductivity. And these two important points, there is one more point which I will tell you, and knowledge about these 3 points is required to understand the Bernoulli's theory. Now the third point. Suppose if there is a compound in which there are 6 surrounding atoms. You know, those surrounding atoms or groups, they are called as ligands. And what is the possible shape of that compound? There is a central metal ion, or you can say central atom, and there are 6 surrounding atoms or groups. So what is the possible shape of that compound? For example, SF6. And even in our present example, which I have given you, K4FeCN6. So in that compound also we have 6 surrounding groups, 6 ligands. So what is the possible shape of such compounds? Now see, when surrounding atoms are 6, the number of ligands 6. So what are the different possible shapes? You know, one particular shape you are all familiar with, that is octahedral. Okay. Now let me give you 3 different possibilities for 6 surrounding atoms case. 1 central atom and 6 surrounding atoms. See, whether it is a normal compound or coordination compound, whatever it may be. It can be SF6 type of compound, it can be K4FeCN6 type of compound, whatever it may be, but if there are 6 surrounding atoms, different possibilities are. What are the different possibilities? One is hexagonal, it is like benzene, hexagonal. At the center we have central metal ion or the central atom, and at each vertex we have one surrounding atom. So this is one possibility. And second possibility, it is a shape about which you are quite familiar, that is octahedral. Now it is octahedral. And we have ligands here, one ligand here. Let me represent the ligand with L. This one, this is ligand, this is also ligand, and this is also ligand. And here lies the central metal ion. Now it is octahedral. And this is hexagonal. So these are the 2 different shapes, 2 possibilities. Okay. Now the third one. It is something like this. Actually, if you visualize it, it is like, suppose here central metal atom is there, central metal ion. We have 3 ligands like this. You see this. 3 ligands above and 3 ligands below. If you join these three ligands, you will get an equilateral triangle. If you join these three ligands, again you will get an equilateral triangle. And at the center, in the middle, we have the central atom or the central metal ion. So somewhere here lies the central metal ion. Ligand, 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 fourth, fifth, sixth. And you know, this shape is called as prismatic. And obviously it comes from that prism. You all know, you all are familiar with the shape of a prism. It is something like that only. It is like a prism. So prismatic. So 6 ligands, 1 central atom. We have 3 different possibilities. These are the possibilities. This is not the actual shape. So if you come to then number of ligands 4. 4 ligands. Then what are the possibilities? One possibility you all know, that is tetrahedral, like methane. And another possibility is there which you have seen in some cases, at least some cases in chemical bonding, that is square planar. In the middle we have central metal ion and there are 4 ligands like this, and it is square planar. And here also central metal ion, 4 ligands around it. So this is square planar. Actually, why I have given you the possibilities? I did not tell you the actual shape. I have given you only some possibilities. Because when Werner proposed his theory, he was about to determine the structure of that coordination entity, shape of the coordination entity. Then what he did, he has written all the possibilities first, then he did some experiments, and from the experimental results, then he concluded that okay, the shape of the coordination compound is this one, not the other possibilities. Suppose if you see coordination number, the number of ligands 6, then what the experiment results are saying, whether it is prismatic or octahedral or hexagonal, what actually is the shape, only experiments can help us in that. Similarly, for 4 ligands we have 2 different possibilities, but what is the actual shape of that particular ligand? Okay. So I will tell you what are the experiments by which Werner decided what is the actual shape when 6 ligands are there, and similarly what is the actual shape when ligands are 4. Now these 3 points, one preliminary knowledge about depression in freezing point, second one preliminary knowledge about molar conductivity, and the third one knowledge about different shapes. If surrounding atoms are 4, what are the different possibilities? If surrounding atoms are 5, what are the different possibilities? And if the surrounding atoms are 6, what are the different possibilities? What are the different possibilities of shapes? Okay. Now with this background, now we can study the Werner's theory, and now we can understand it very easily. Now let me continue with the actual Werner's theory. With the background I have given you. 3 points if you remember. One is depression and freezing point, second one is molar conductivity data, and third one is shapes, different shapes. If the coordination number is 6, what are the different shapes possible? If the total number of ligands, coordination number means total number of ligands. If the total number of ligands is 4, then what are the different possibilities? Okay. Now actually in 3 different steps, let me discuss the Werner's theory. So the first point here is Werner's determination of molecular formula. Molecular formula of a complex compound or coordination compound. So this is the first point regarding Werner's theory. So by doing experiments about one particular compound, that is COCl3 dot 6NH3. All of you look at that compound, COCl3 dot 6NH3. Now there is a second compound that is COCl3 dot 5NH3. And there is a third compound that is COCl3 dot 4NH3. Now here, this we have 3 Cl minus and 6 ammonia. Here the same 3 Cl minus but only 5 ammonia. And here the same 3 Cl minus and only 4 ammonia. Now how do you know that which is the counterion, which is present in the coordination sphere or coordination entity, and which is present outside it? You all know both Cl minus and ammonia can donate lone pairs. Both of them are potential Lewis bases. So both of them are ligands. But who is the actual ligand in each of these three examples? This question was answered by Werner using two experimental data. One is the depression in freezing point data and second one is molar conductivity. Now let us see how. Now suppose if you see first depression in freezing point data. Depression in freezing point. Let me write down that freezing point as Fp. Then Werner found that the first complex, when 1 mole of that complex is dissolved in 1 kg of water, he found that the freezing point of the resultant solution decreased to the same extent when 1 mole of AlCl3 is dissolved in 1 kg of water. That means, as far as depression in freezing point is concerned, this compound was found to behave exactly like AlCl3. Okay, so that means upon dissolution of 1 mole of this compound in 1 kg of water, that compound dissociated into 4 moles of particles. So you see AlCl3, you take 1 mole of AlCl3, you dissolve it in water, and how many moles of particles you will get? 4. 1 mole Al plus 3 and 3 moles Cl minus. So how much freezing point depression will be generated by that AlCl3? The same was also generated by this particular compound. Werner found that. By doing experiments, Werner found that. So this compound is releasing 4 particles just like AlCl3. Okay, now suppose if you come to the molar conductivity data. Molar conductivity, then it is found that the molar conductivity of this particular complex is almost same as that of LaCl3, lanthanum chloride. And we have seen already, lanthanum chloride is a 1:3 type of electrolyte. Total charges are 6. Total charges, cationic charge 3, and we have 3 Cl minus, uni negative anions 3. So total anionic charge is also 3. So 6 charges. So the molar conductivity of this particular complex, this particular coordination compound corresponds to 6 charges. Okay, so depression in freezing point says that this compound should be dissociated into 4 different particles. Molar conductivity data says that that compound should have total 6 charges. Total cationic and anionic charges together must be 6. So then what must be the actual structure of this compound? Actual structure, that means which are inside, Cl minus is inside or ammonia is inside. If you come to that actual structure, then obviously it should be CONH3 taken 6 times Cl3. All the ammonia inside and all the chloride ions outside as counter ions. Okay, now see 4 particles. Now if you dissolve this in water, just you tell me whether you will get 4 particles or not. Yes. The complex ion is the cation and counter ions are 3 Cl minus. So total 4 particles. And if you see the charges, yes, cationic charge is plus 3, anionic charge is minus 1 and we have 3 such ions. So total charges are 6. Now if you dissolve it in water, it dissociates into CONH3 taken 6 times plus 3 plus 3 Cl minus. So total charge is 6, total particles 4. Yes, this particular structure exactly satisfies both the experimental data. Now this is how Werner determined the structure. Suppose instead of this, you take this particular structure CONH3 taken 5 times Cl and 2 chlorines outside along with that 1 ammonia. Now you take that complex and you see whether this particular structure satisfies both the data, both depression in freezing point data and molar conductivity data? No. Suppose if you dissolve this in water, yeah, definitely you will get 4 particles. One is the complex ion, 2 chloride ions and 1 ammonia. Definitely you will get 4 particles. This is being satisfied. But what about this one? What is the charge of this complex ion? It is only plus 2. So cationic charge is plus 2 and total anionic charge is minus 2. So we are getting only 4 charges. But the data says that the total charges must be 6. So this cannot be the structure of this particular example, the first example. Okay. Now if you come to the second one, then it is found that the depression in freezing point data of this complex, it corresponds to 3 particles. Depression in freezing point of this compound is almost same as that of CaCl2, calcium chloride. That means when you dissolve 1 mole of this particle in water, you will get only 3 particles. Okay. And molar conductivity data says that the total charges, cationic and anionic, it is 4 charges. So in order to satisfy both the data, the structure of this particular complex should be taken like this: CONH3 taken 5 times, 1 chlorine inside and 2 chlorines outside. And you all know, if you dissolve it in water, you will get CONH3 taken 5 times Cl plus 2 plus 2 Cl minus. So total 3 particles, 1 complex ion, 2 anions. And total charges if you see, yes, it is 4, cationic charge 2, anionic charge 2. No other combination can satisfy both the data. See, the structure, the correct structure satisfies both the data, both molar conductivity data and depression in freezing point data. If only one of them is satisfied and other is violated, that cannot be the correct structure. So only this structural formula can satisfy both the data. Now, if you come to the last example, it is found that here the depression freezing point data says that this complex must release only 2 particles. It is like NaCl. It is like NaNO3, KCl, KBr, 1:1 electrolyte, only 2 particles. And charges are also 2, so 2 charges. And if that is the case, then only one structural formula satisfies this. CONH3 taken 4 times, Cl2 and 1 chlorine outside. Now, if you dissolve it in water, you will get CONH3 taken 4 times, Cl2. Overall charge of the complex ion is +1 plus 1 Cl minus. Now, only that structure satisfies that. And here one more interesting point. The color of this complex is found to be yellow. Of course, it is experimentally found. The color of this particular complex is found to be purple. And now, surprisingly and interestingly, the color of the last example, the third, it is found to be green in some cases, violet in some other cases. Green and violet. And in both the cases, this data says that there must be 2 particles. In both the cases, this data says that it must be 2 charges. So the structural formula of green colored complex and violet colored complex is same. It must be same. Because green and violet colored complexes both are giving same data. Both molar conductivity data as well as depression in freezing point data. So the structural formula is same. Now we can easily say that if structural formula is same, you are getting 2 different colors. That means there must be 2 isomers. And let us see what kind of isomers are they. So you all know isomers have same structural formula, same molecular formula, but different structural formula. Structural formula in the sense maybe geometrical isomers, maybe optical isomers like that. But anyway, this complex does not show isomerism. We got only one such complex, yellow colored. This complex is not showing any isomerism. We got only one color, purple. But there are 2 compounds having this particular molecular formula. One is green, another one is violet. We will see later actually what kind of isomerism this compound can show. So this is how Werner determined molecular formula of those compounds, the actual molecular formula, which is the ligand. Actually writing like this and writing like this, both are only molecular formula. I have not told you any structural formula here. Structural formula means hybridization, shape, whether it is octahedral or tetrahedral or square planar. No, I am not talking about that. I have not given you any structural formula. I have given you only details of the molecular formula. Who is the ligand, who is the counterion. If I write the molecular formula like this, there is no idea, it is not clear whether ammonia is the ligand or chlorine is the ligand, chloride is the ligand. But when you write like this, yes, we are now clear. Coordination entity is clear. What is outside the coordination entity is clear. What is the central metal ion? What is the ligand? What is the counterion? Yes. By using these 2 data, Werner clearly determined the detailed molecular formula of 3 compounds, 3 complexes, coordination compounds. Now let me come to the second point in Werner's theory. Now let me discuss about his structural formula determination. In the previous topic, I discussed about how Werner determined the detailed molecular formula of the compound. Who is the ligand, who is the counterion. Now Werner determined even the structural formula of the complex compound. or coordination compound. That means its shape, actual shape, octahedral or tetrahedral or square planar. Now let me explain by taking 3 examples. Okay. Second point, Werner's determination of structural formula. You can say the shape of the coordination compound. That is obviously what is meant by structural formula, detailed structure. Okay. Now let me take just some general examples. I am not taking any particular example. Let me take some general examples. Suppose we have a complex that is M X 6. This is the complex we have. Capital M is the central metline, X is the ligand. Let us ignore the counter ion for the time being. To simplify the discussion, let us ignore the counter ion. There is no counter ion. So central metline is there and 6 ligands are there. So if there are 6 ligands, what can be the shape of that compound? We already discussed about that. One possible shape is hexagonal. Let me write down here. This is one possible shape. It is like benzene, planar. The ligands are at the vertices of a regular hexagon and the central metline is at the middle, center. Now, second possibility, octahedral. And third possibility, prismatic, prism. Now, these are the 3 possibilities. Okay. Suppose if the complex is MX6. Now, what Werner did, by doing experiments, he found what are the total number of isomers possible for that type of complex. By doing experiments, he found that. Okay. So here the first column is actual number of isomers. And here if the structure is hexagonal, then how many isomers are possible? If the structure is octahedral, how many isomers are possible? And if the structure is prismatic, then how many isomers are possible? So first he found, by doing experiments, he found the actual number of isomers. Then if that complex were hexagonal, then how many isomers would be possible? One thing he has written there. If the same complex were octahedral, then how many isomers would be possible? Then last, if the complex were prismatic, then how many isomers would be possible? And which number is matching with the actual number? Finally, that is the structure. So this is how Werner determined the structure of the complex compound, coordination compound. And for this, he considered 3 different structures: prismatic, octahedral, hexagonal. Okay. Now come to the first complex, that is MX6. If it is hexagonal, then only one isomer is found. Even if it is octahedral, only one. Even if it is prismatic, only one. All ligands are same. All the ligands are same. If it is hexagonal, only one possibility. Even if it is octahedral, only one possibility. Everywhere is X. So how it can show isomerism? And even if it is prismatic, then only one possibility. And actual isomers found is also one. So obviously, with this particular analysis, nobody can decide whether MX6 is hexagonal or octahedral or prismatic, because the actual number of isomers is matching with all the 3. These are all the 3 possibilities. 1, 1, 1, 1. So there is no way we can decide whether this particular complex is octahedral or prismatic or hexagonal. Now, if you move on to the second complex, that is MX5Y. Now actually next he has taken two different types of ligands. One is X, another one is Y. And there are 5 X ligands and 1 Y ligand. Okay. Now suppose if you come to the actual number of isomers, actual number is found to be 1. Now if it is hexagonal, then how many isomers are possible? If it is hexagonal, only 1. It is something like this. Here we have a hexagon like this. Now here central Maitland and these are the ligands. Now here X, 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 Y. Now do you think if I keep this Y here, it makes a difference? No. Does not make any difference. Wherever you want to keep the Y, you keep it, you will get the same compound. Here or here or here or here or here. So number of isomers possible if this complex is hexagonal is only 1. And actual number is also 1. So this compound, this coordination compound could be hexagonal. Now if you come to octahedral, then octahedral is like this. It is like SF6. Now here is the metal, here X, here also X, X, Y. Now if I keep this Y here, does it make any difference? Let us see. Let us see that. Now I am keeping Y here and the rest of the X ligands here. Now these two are exactly identical. There is absolutely no difference between these two. Because in octahedral all bond angles are 90. So the interactions between Y and this Y and other X ligands is in both the compounds is same. So these two are exactly identical. Now see in this particular compound, for example, angle between Y and one of the X is 180 and angle between Y and other X ligands 90. So 4 90s and 180, and here you see angle between this Y and this X is 180. So 180 and the rest 90. You see between these two 90, between these two 90, between these two 90 and between these two 90. So these two are exactly identical, no difference whatsoever. So these two are identical. Now if you come to the last one, that is prismatic structure, then you see here. Now this is prismatic structure. Now you think does it make any difference if you change the place of Y? Now let me keep Y here first and the rest are X, and in between there is central Maitland. Now this is one compound. Now let me keep Y in a different place. Now let me keep Y here, X, 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 X and X. Now these two are exactly identical. This is Y. So it does not make any difference wherever you keep Y. So if it is hexagonal, only one possibility. If it is octahedral, again there is only one possibility. If it is prismatic, again there is one possibility. So there is no way you can decide whether MX5Y is prismatic or octahedral or hexagonal. No way. Now let us proceed further. Now let me take another example, that is MX4Y2. Now we have 4 ligands of one type and 2 ligands of another type. So 4 X's are there and 2 Y's are there. And actual number of isomers found by the Werner is 2. This is the actual number. By doing experiments he found this. Then if the structure is hexagonal, then how many isomers are possible? 3. And I will write all the structures very soon. So this number is not matching. So it is very clear that this particular complex cannot be hexagonal. Okay, if it is octahedral, yes, then 2 possibilities are there. this number is matching. And if it is prismatic, then there are 4 possibilities are there. Again, the number is not matching. So now Werner was in a position to decide that this particular complex is octahedral in shape, because the actual isomers and the isomers expected from the octahedral shape, the numbers are matching. So the shape of the complex must be octahedral. So this way Werner determined the structural formula of the complexes using depression in freezing point data and molar conductivity data. He determined the detailed molecular formula. Who is ligand? Who is the counterion? And by this isomer counting, so he considered different shapes, and theoretically how many isomers are possible for each shape, but what is the actual number of isomers? Which is matching, you see? Whichever is matching, there is the actual structure. Now this is the way Werner found the structural formula. Now let me tell you, if it is hexagonal, then how 3 different isomers are possible? Now see. Now this is one possibility. Y here, Y here. This is the central metal ion. X, X, X and X. Now these 2 are Y's. Yeah, this is one possibility. Second possibility is, now let me write down Y here, another Y here, and in between those 2 X, and the rest of the X ligands are here. Now see, these 2 are same or different? They are different, they are not identical, because here the angle between Y and Y is 60 degree, but there the angle between Y and Y is 120 degree. Yes, there is definitely a difference. Now if you come to the third possibility, then here Y, and let me take Y here, another Y, and rest of the positions X. These are the 3 different possibilities. Here the angle between Y is 60, here 120, here 180. So no 2 are same, no 2 are same. Now if you come to octahedral possibilities, I told you already 2 are possible, and let me show you those 3. One is X, X, Y here, and X here, X here. Now you see what is the angle between 2 Y's? It is 90. Now if you come to the other possibility, then here X, X, X and X, Y here and Y here. Now these 2 are same. Do you think these 2 are identical? No way. Here the angle between Y's is 90, and here the angle between the 2 Y's is 180 degree. Now these 2 are different. Now here Y and Y, they are closer to each other. So this isomer is called as cis, and these their same Y ligands are farther away from each other. So that is trans. So if it is octahedral, if the structure of this compound is octahedral, then 2 different isomers are possible. You see, all of you, let me show you this particular octahedral shape. Actually, all of you see, this is the octahedral shape, SF6. And if you can recall, it is sp3d2 hybridization. Now, octahedral shape can best be imagined in the room in which you are sitting, maybe the classroom or maybe any other room. Now, you know, if you take that room as a cube roughly, so cube has 6 faces, and you take the center of each face, so you keep one ligand each at the center. each at all those 6 centers. So 6 phase centers. This is one center. If you take this classroom, this is one center. To your right, to your left, above, below, back. So 6 phase centers are there. You join them. In the center of the classroom, we have the central midline, exactly in the center. So now this is the octahedron. Now suppose, you see, if I replace this ligand with a white color ligand, and then let me replace another ligand with another white color ligand. Now all of you see. Now what is the angle between the two white colored ligands? You can say these white colored ligands are Y, the rest are X. So what is the angle between these two? 90. Now if I replace this ligand with white, now you see this. And here the same red. Now what is the angle between those two white colored ligands? It is 180. So this is trans, and when you keep one white here and one white here 90 to each other, then that will be cis. So two different compounds having the same geometry, that is octahedral geometry. And if you can recall, in the previous example also I told you that the last example COCl3 dot 4 ammonia. COCl3 dot 4 ammonia, now the two different compounds, one is green colored, another one is violet colored, yes. In those two, one is cis and another one is trans. Of course, which is cis and which is trans, now for the timing we cannot determine, but definitely they are cis and trans, because it is exactly like this. 4 ammonia ligands, 2 chlorine ligands, and in that case X stands for ammonia and Y stands for chlorine. So green colored and violet colored two complexes, one is cis and another one is trans, two isomers, same molecular formula but different structural formula. And we will see later actually how can you determine which is cis and which is trans, whether green colored is cis or violet colored is cis, that we will see later, don't worry about it. Now if you come to the last particular shape, prismatic, now see how 4 are possible. Now this is the first possibility. And here Y here and Y here, the rest are X. Okay, next possibility. Y here and Y here, and the rest are X. Actually, I told you already, prismatic means above the central metline we have 3 ligands like this. If you join them, then you will get equilateral triangle. And below the metline also we have 3 like that. So here both Y's are on one side of the metal, and here the Y's are on either side of the metal. One on this side and one on this side, either side of the metal. So these two are not same. These two are not identical, 2 different isomers. Now, if you take the third case, then this is another possibility, one Y here and another Y here, they are diagonally opposite. So X, X and X, the rest are X. But where is the fourth? Now you see very carefully, structurally speaking we are having 3 possibilities. 3 different possibilities. Structurally you won't get any fourth one. Exhaustively we will get only 3 structural isomers. If you see the last one, that is optically active. And all of you please recall whatever you know about optical activity. Optical isomerism. The isomers which have same molecular formula, same structural formula, but different configuration, different 3-dimensional spatial arrangement. Their physical properties are almost same except their optical rotation. One rotates the plane polarized light in the clockwise direction and another rotates in the anti-clockwise direction. And you see carefully the third one. And how do you determine whether a particular compound exhibits optical isomerism? It should not have any plane of symmetry. It should not have any center of symmetry. If a compound does not have any element of symmetry, then that compound is optically active. If the compound has any one of the elements of symmetry, either plane or center, then that compound is optically inactive. Now you see this compound? Yes, here lies the plane of symmetry. This plane divides the molecule into two parts which are mirror image of each other. Now you come here, then this is the plane of symmetry, horizontal plane, you see? This is the plane of symmetry. So this is inactive, but you see the third one? You cannot find any plane of symmetry. Neither the compound has any center of symmetry. So this compound is optically active. So if it is optically active, then total number of isomers are 4. One, this one, second one, this one, third and fourth. One is dextro, third is dextro, fourth is levo. Because it is optically active, there are two isomers, stereoisomers, enantiomers. So one is dextro and another one is levo. So total 4 number of isomers. So if it is hexagonal, the number would be 3. If it is octahedral, the number would be 2 only, which is matching only, that is matching with the actual number of isomers. And if it is prismatic, then the total number would be 4. So MX4Y2 must be octahedral in shape. So these are the 2 important points in Werner's theory. Using the freezing point depression data and molar conductivity data, he determined which is ligand and which is not, which is counterion. And by isomer counting, different shapes, different possibilities, theoretical possibilities, and what is the actual number, and which number is matching, which theoretical number is matching with the actual number. That is the shape of the compound. So this is how he determined structural formula. And finally the conclusion. By doing all this analysis, matching experimental data with theoretical predictions, so Werner concluded that there are 2 valencies for each coordination compound. So each coordination compound has 2 valencies, coordination compound or complex compound. Actually, if you see a simple salt, simple compound like KCl, NaCl, Na2SO4, so it has only one valency. Suppose if you take FeCl3, what is the valency of iron in FeCl3? Only one, 3. Valency is 3. So in normal salts, the anion or cation, they have only one type of valency. But in coordination compounds, the coordination compound, whether cation or anion, it has 2 different valencies. One is called as primary valency. So primary valency of the complex compound or coordination compound is nothing but the number of charges on central metal ion. It is very simple. Number of charges on the central metal ion. Now generally this valency is ionizable. Generally, of course, not in all cases, but generally it is ionizable, and generally it is satisfied by anions. Now, the complex compound or the coordination compound also has another valency, that is secondary valency. And secondary valency is also called as coordination number. And secondary valency is nothing but number of lone pairs accepted by the central metal ion. Number of lone pairs accepted by the central metal ion. Actually, in most of the cases, it is simply number of ligands. Because generally speaking, in majority of the cases, each ligand donates only one lone pair. But in few cases, one ligand may donate more than one lone pair. As long as a ligand donates only one lone pair, secondary valence is nothing but equal to number of ligands. It is not a problem. But it is actually defined accurately defined in terms of lone pairs, not in terms of ligands. Because sometimes a ligand may donate more than one lone pair. So it is the number of lone pairs accepted by the central metal ion. And it is also called as coordination number. And it is non-ionizable generally. Non-ionizable. And this particular valency is satisfied by anions, neutral molecules, and even sometimes, although very rare, cations. Secondary valency being satisfied by the cation is very rare, but yes, it exists. So secondary valency may be satisfied by any type of compounds, cation, anion, neutral, but generally primary valency is satisfied by only anions. Primary valency is ionizable again in majority of the cases, in not all cases, and this is non-ionizable. Secondary valency is non-ionizable. We have already seen this. See, secondary valency is satisfied by covalent bonds. And covalent bonds, they do not break in water. Obviously, they are non-ionizable. So, suppose if you see the example CONH3 taken 6 times Cl3, for example, then here the primary valency of this particular complex is equal to 3. Ammonia neutral, outside we have 3 chloride ions. So the overall charge of the coordination sphere is 3, and obviously that is the charge on cobalt. So it is 3, and secondary valency is 6. There are 6 ligands, and each ligand can donate one lone pair. So total 6 lone pairs donated by the ligand. So secondary valency is 6. So this is another postulate of Werner's theory. So there are 3 points actually in Werner's theory. One is definition of primary and secondary valencies. Second one is how Werner determined the detailed molecular formula. And third one, how Werner determined the detailed structural formula, the shape of the molecule, the shape of the coordination compound, whether it is octahedral or tetrahedral. So this is all about Werner's theory.